The tasting room smelled like rosemary and lemon, and the table in front of us was a catalog come to life. Linen swatches and shades I'd never known had names. Votives already smudged from someone's earlier hands. Steak medallions arranged like medals on white plates. The planner, a woman with a laser pointer and a whisper voice, said the word ethereal as if it were a dish we could order. I nodded because that's what I did, and because in that moment, under the soft wash of filament bulbs and the look on Madison's face, I really wanted to believe we were building something together. Then she took the plate away from me. "Carbs before the final fitting?" she said sweetly, like I'd just dropped a fork instead of being hungry after work. She slipped the plate toward her maid of honor, who raised a brow at me with a pity I could taste. "Think of the photos, Ev." The planner smiled tight. I folded the napkin on my lap, pretending that humiliation was a napkin too, something I could fold away so no one would see it. That was the moment I started counting the candles on the table just to keep from counting the ways I'd compromised. I told myself to breathe, to be a good sport. I told myself we had come too far to get petty about plates. When the waiter came with tiny spoons of panna cotta, I shoved mine deeper under a napkin when she looked my way. I thought, funny, my future wife is monitoring my dessert intake for the sake of pictures we'll look at when we're old. I tried to laugh. It sounded postcard small. Afterward, in the hallway of the old hotel that Madison had declared European without the flight, she pressed a swatch of chiffon to my chest and squinted. "This color makes your hair look expensive," she said. "I wish we could dye it to match." "I like my hair," I said, patting it, a reflex. She blinked like the lights had flickered. "I'm kidding." I tried to keep it light. "About the hair or me not eating dinner." She slid the swatch into her folder and kissed me on the cheek. Her lipstick smelled like strawberries and ambition. "It's not about you," she said. "It's about us." At the elevator, the maid of honor, Courtney, a woman who had introduced herself to me as a vibe, leaned close enough for me to smell her hairspray. "Less is more," she whispered, voice like a stage note. And when the doors closed, I could see Madison's reflection looking anywhere but at me. That night, I drove home along the lake, the skyline caught in the windows like a second city. My phone hummed full of emails from vendors I barely remembered booking, tasting reminders and photography mood boards and rentals for a lounge area we'd never sit in. I'd been nodding and writing checks for months. The funny thing about saying yes, I discovered, is that it becomes a habit quicker than you think. And Madison's yes was always a slippery thing, always tied to a bigger picture and a glossy finish. Driving made it easier to remember the beginning, when saying yes to her felt like pulling open the door to some place warm. I grew up west, in a leafier part of the state, a place that smelled like hose water in summer and wood shavings in my dad's workshop. He taught high school shop and coached baseball. Mom worked the counter at the library and knew everyone's dog by name. I learned to plane a board straight, to make a dovetail that wouldn't budge, to tell when someone was nervous by how they held their nails. I'd saved to put a good down payment on a house someday, a red brick place with a porch deep enough to hold a rainstorm. Madison came into my life on a spring night, at a fundraiser for foster care programs. The gym was too bright and smelled faintly like baked ziti and floor wax. She was a friend of a friend, in a dress that somehow didn't wrinkle and shoes I later learned cost more than my first car. We laughed at the same bad raffle prizes. Her laugh had a solar quality to it, like it warmed whatever it fell on. We kissed under a parking garage light and it felt like finding money in a pocket you didn't remember having. There was nothing about her voice then that sounded sharp. I cooked. She said no one had cooked for her in a long time. We went to thrift stores, and she found a set of antique champagne coupes, and I told her I liked how she looked when she wore one of my shirts, sleeves rolled, feet bare. We did that thing where you start narrating your future out loud, where you say someday and you mean it. We weren't perfect, but we were kind, and that's what I stapled to my heart. When we got engaged, it was at my parents' house under the elm tree, ring tucked in the pink lady apples I'd peeled and cooked down in the kitchen, where I'd learned to stir and not scorch. I said a lot of things, and most of them were about showing up. She cried. My mom cried. My dad's eyes went wet and he hugged me hard enough to pop my back. I slept with my hand on her hand and felt the weight of the ring, a pleasant anchor. Weddings, it turns out, have a way of calling forth the townspeople in you. Everyone shows up, the part of you that cares too much about lace, the part that wants to run, and if you're not careful, the part of you that lives for applause comes too. Madison had a following online, a wash of strangers who liked her outfits and the way she arranged books by color and the favorite candles she'd line up like a boutique. I loved that she cared about how things looked. I loved that she could make a room feel intentional with a handful of eucalyptus and a mirror. But the wedding planning did something to that love, stretched it thin. She started speaking in content terms. "The ceremony arch is going to break the internet," she'd say, and then, "We need a champagne tower." We, as in me and my checkbook. I'd make a joke. She'd laugh and then show me a mood board with an intensity that made me swallow the sand of my concern. I sold an old motorcycle I'd rebuilt mask by mask and piece by piece, something that had idled in my dad's garage for years. I put off upgrading my battered truck. I passed overtime to others so I could make vendor calls and tastings that felt suspiciously like standing next to a couple who had forgotten to tell me why we were there. When my grandma mailed Madison a quilt she'd made with her thumb joints aching and her eyes going foggy, Madison smiled and then mentioned the color palette with a wince. When I said my grandma was getting frail, she said, "Maybe just the ceremony for her, not the reception." It landed between us with a thud, little things piled up like mail you keep saying you'll sort. The suit she picked for me was not quite the color I wanted, and when I tried to add a tie with a small pattern that reminded me of my dad's old ties, she said, "Let's keep it minimal and elevated." Elevated meant that everything old and loved looked a little wrong. There were group texts that I wasn't in but heard about. There were brunches where strangers toasted to finally upgrading from humble roots, and Madison didn't correct them. I'd offer to pick up her mother from the spa and would get a text back that read, "Diane prefers private drivers." When I told her my cousin was flying in with his wife and new baby, Madison bit her lip and asked if they could get a sitter and leave the baby at the hotel during the ceremony. "It's a vibe thing," she'd say. A vibe. A word as empty and heavy as a balloon. The real crack came quietly. Madison had asked me to drop off a deposit check at the planner's office. I slipped it into the folder and waited while the planner printed something. On the counter was a list labeled with a neat, clean font. Guest Master. Curiosity is a simple human thing. I shouldn't have looked, but I looked. My last name wasn't anywhere. I told myself it was because they used first names only. I scanned. I found my dad, at least his first name. I found my mom, then a hyphen and a note. Maybe reception only? I found my grandma's name crossed out. "What's that?" I asked, and my voice did that thin thing it does when you've already decided to pretend you didn't see. "Seating chart," the planner said, not looking up. "Don't worry, I haven't placed you yet." That night I told myself stories until I fell asleep. It's a draft, it's a mistake, it's a Friday night brain slip. And the next day, when I stopped by Madison's with coffee and a smile, she was on a call with Courtney, laughing about their dry run for the bridal entrance. I waved. She pressed a finger to her lips. "We're finalizing the guest list," she mouthed. My phone buzzed with an email from the country club hosting the rehearsal dinner. It was a confirmation, and there's no reason a confirmation should scare you unless you know, deep down, the paper is about to say something you can't fix with a napkin and a smile. The email had a link, and the link had my name right there, except it didn't. There was a table labeled Family of Bride, a table labeled Vendors, and a table labeled Friends. For my parents, a note, Seats near kitchen. For me, nothing. I scrolled 3 times. My stomach made a hollow sound like a jar set too hard on a counter. In the afternoon, I called the club. The woman on the phone had a voice like soft carpeting. I told her there must be a mistake with the seating. "Of course," she said. "I can double check." She came back after a pause that felt like weather. "I'm sorry," she said. "You aren't on the list." "I'm the groom," I said. I heard the words leave me like a kite that had lost its wind. Another pause. "Would you like me to connect you with the planner?" I hung up. I sat in my truck in front of Madison's building, watching a dog walker cross the street with a bouquet of leashes and wagging tails. When she texted asking me to grab sparkling water on my way up, something cool and precise clicked into place inside me. I went to the corner store and walked slowly down the aisle where the water bottles gleamed like little skyscrapers. I put them back. I stood there and watched the bubbles slide in a bottle and thought about promises and their shapes. Upstairs, she met me at the door, hair in a slick bun, eyes like glossy lake windows. "Hey," she sang, kissing my chin because she was on the phone and only had that free. "We just finalized the list." "I called," I said. I kept my voice level, like a carpenter measuring twice before cutting. "The club said I'm not on it." She muted her call. "What?" "They said I'm not on the guest list." Her face did some math I couldn't see. Then she inhaled. "You're not on the guest list," she said slowly, like it was a line in a play she was practicing but hadn't wanted to say to me yet. "It's an industry event," she added quickly, words tumbling. "It's a curated dinner for partners and sponsors. It's not personal. It's content. You'll meet us for photos after." There it was, flicked at me like a pebble and hitting like a brick. "Partners and sponsors," I repeated. "Is that what I am?" She rolled her eyes, and it should have made the floor tilt, but it didn't. I was suddenly very still inside. "Ev, don't be dramatic. This is how it works. You'll be there when it matters." "I was there when it mattered," I said. "When we said yes." She shrugged one shoulder, and in that gesture lived every time I'd said okay when I meant ouch. "It's just logistics," she said. "We're celebrating my brand's partnerships. It's normal." I let the silence sit between us until it developed its own spine. Then I said, clearly because I wanted to hear it in the room with us, "You're not on the guest list," she said. I let the words hang there like laundry on a windy day. My mouth worked before my hands did. I cut the check. "No money for the wedding?" Her phone fell to the couch and skittered like a bug. "What?" "I cut the check," I said again, steadier. "There is no money for your wedding." I stood up. The chair made a whisper against the rug. "For this wedding, for this brand event, for whatever you've decided this is." She reached for me like a parent grabbing a child before they step into the street. "You can't just, Ev, we have contracts, deposits, deadlines. People have been counting on me since we picked a date," I said. "Someone counted on me to sell my bike. Someone counted on me to tell my grandma she might not be welcome at a party in her own family. Someone counted on me to keep saying yes even when I wasn't allowed to eat dinner." Her eyes flashed. "Oh, come on. Now you're making it sound..." "I'm making it sound like what it is." I picked up my jacket. My hands didn't shake, which felt like a miracle. "I'm done being the sponsor of an event that won't even let me sit." She started to cry then, big pretty tears like in movies. I'd loved her face. It hurt to see it all glossy with panic. "Oh my God," she said. "Courtney, tell him. Tell him it's just for optics." She hit speaker on the phone that had been listening this whole time. Courtney's voice came through tinny and brittle. "He's being selfish," Courtney announced to nobody and everybody. "This is bigger than him." I laughed. It surprised us all. It was a nice laugh, loud and round. "It's not bigger than marriage," I said, "and that's the only thing I wanted to be bigger than me." I left before the building could squeeze me into a different shape. In the truck, where the world narrowed to a steering wheel and the air that moved through the vents, I let my hands shake. Then I took out the folder I'd kept with every contract, every receipt. The wedding planner had once called me thorough like it was a slight. I called my bank and explained that a cashier's check I'd ordered that morning hadn't yet been picked up. I asked them to halt it. The woman on the phone said, "We can do that." And her voice had the same soft carpet quality as the club lady. Only this time it sounded like a path laid down just for me. I called the venue and the caterer and the photographer. I tried to be kind. I told them I was canceling my involvement. I apologized for the trouble. More than one of them said, "I'm sorry." And I believed they meant it. The planner called 7 times. I let it ring. I thought of my father holding a plank to the miter saw, saying, "Measure twice, son, or you'll lose more than you think." I had measured. I had come to the end of my measuring tape. Word spreads, that is something people forget. If you can gather a crowd with pretty pictures, you can gather a different crowd with a story about a groom who, in a single sentence, canceled a wedding-shaped machine. Madison's mother left me a voicemail that sounded like glass breaking, asking how I could humiliate her family after all they had done for me, which included, as far as I could tell, reminding me at least twice that I didn't know what a charger plate was and that the world had moved beyond my taste. I didn't know if the world had or hadn't. I did know I'd never asked it to. I wrote an email because writing had always been where my honesty lived. I sent it to Madison, to her mother, to her maid of honor, to the planner with the whisper voice. I wrote that I loved Madison. I wrote that I would have married her if the wedding had been a backyard barbecue with paper plates or a courthouse with flickering lights. I wrote about my grandmother's quilt and my mother's hands and my father's example. I wrote about what yes meant and what no had to mean now. I attached a screenshot of the confirmation from the club because facts are a kindness when people insist on a different reality. I wrote that I was stepping back. I wished them the stunning event they so clearly wanted. I wrote, "I'm not your sponsor." I wanted to add, "I'm your partner or I'm nothing," but I didn't have to. Silence can do its own talking. Madison called me all evening. I turned off my phone and sat on my porch in the early dark, listening to someone's wind chimes and a dog bark 2 houses over. My neighbor, an older guy named Walt, who wore flannel year-round and smelled like cedar and peppermint, came by with 2 beers. He set one near my hand and didn't say anything until the cicadas were a song you could sit inside. "It hurts like a tooth," he said finally. And then one day, it doesn't. In the morning, I drove to my parents' house. Mom made coffee thick as river water and stood with me at the sink while I told her everything. She put her hand over mine the moment I told her the guest list part, and I saw my face reflected in the window above the sink. A man learning something too late, but at least learning it. Dad didn't say "I told you so," though in his eyes I could see every time he'd watched me swallow something that wasn't meant for me. He hugged me until my ribs squeaked. "Proud of you," he said into my shoulder. "You put the tool down when it tried to run you." In the days that followed, there was a kind of quiet that only happens when you come close to a crash that doesn't happen at the last minute. Madison's circle ran damage control online, spinning a tale of a postponement for personal reasons. Her mother sent a flurry of texts about deposits and reputations and being an adult. Courtney sent a single message that read, "I hope your next girl likes Costco sheet cake." And I wrote back, "I hope my next girl likes people." After a while, Madison came to the house. She stood on the porch with a bouquet of peonies that looked embarrassed to be there, the petals folding in on themselves. She wore no makeup. Her face, without its usual polish, reminded me of our early days. The girl in my kitchen laughing because she'd never cooked with cumin before, tapping her nose with flour. She cried in my living room, wiping her eyes with the edge of her sleeve like she was trying to erase the past hour. "I messed up," she said. "I messed this up. I don't know. I got lost." Everyone had an opinion. I started thinking of everything as a shot list instead of a life. She took a breath that wobbled. "I'm sorry, Evan. I'm so sorry." Hearing my own name in that room felt like a gift after being called partner and sponsor and vibe killer. I nodded. I believed she was sorry, just as I'd believed her when she said she loved me. Both could be true, and it wasn't enough. "I would have married you barefoot under a streetlight," I said quietly. "I wanted to marry you, but I want to be seen while I do it." She cried harder then, and I felt something unclench in my chest. Forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a door you hold open for yourself, and maybe for the other person too. I told her that. I told her I forgave her. I told her I wasn't coming back. She nodded small. "I will spend a long time being sorry," she said. "I don't expect—" She stopped. "Thank you for not ruining it in front of everyone." I thought of the emails, the calls I hadn't made, the speech I could have given with a microphone that would have set the room on fire. There are many ways to win, and only a few of them let you sleep. I didn't want to hurt you, I said. I just wanted you to stop hurting me. When she left, my house felt bigger. It's strange. You take away a future and somehow the room grows. I went into the spare bedroom where we had stacked sample vases and crates of faux flowers I'd hated, and I sat on the floor and stared at the mess until I could see it clearly as a future I didn't have to live in. Then I called the donation center and arranged a pickup. Someone somewhere was about to be thrilled by a box of taper candles in a color that had a name like a dessert and a sunset. Work steadied me. My hands knew planks and screws and finish. I built 2 shelves for my mom's reading room and repaired the step on the back porch that had always sighed when you stepped on it. Walt came by with plans for a garden bench, and by the end of the week we had something you could sit on and talk about fishing and heartbreak and the weather. Neighbors started to ask for little projects, and I said yes to those yeses, the good kind that made me sleep like I'd earned rest. A few months later, I ran into our almost wedding photographer at the farmer's market by the river. Her name was Nora. She had a camera slung across her chest like a satchel and hair that refused to stay in its braid. She had been kind in every meeting, the only vendor who had looked me straight in the eye and asked what I wanted besides nice pictures. It's funny what kindness does. It glows in memory like a porch light left on. She stopped by my booth of cutting boards and picture frames. I heard, she said gently. I guess everyone did, I said, not bitter, just stating weather. I hope you got the cancellation notice before you rented a car. She smiled, crooked. I did. I also saw your email. It was my favorite thing I read that week. We talked about wood and weather and the tomatoes that were ugly and perfect. We didn't talk about weddings. When she left, she handed me a card. For when you need photos of your work, she said, or just to say hi. I didn't call right away. I let my life fill with sawdust and coffee and the small pleasures of making something and finishing it and handing it to someone who would love it for reasons that had nothing to do with likes. But I kept that card on my fridge. One evening, when the air tasted like rain that hadn't fallen yet, I sent a message that read, I could use a few photos of some benches and maybe coffee after. Madison sent a text once more around the season when the leaves started to go. A photo of her in a sweater with a caption that said she was learning to like plain days. I wrote back, plain days are where the good stuff hides. She sent a heart, and that was that. Later, I saw that she'd posted less and listened more. If there is a moral, it might live there. Sometimes losing the spectacle is how you get your sight back. My grandma came over with a quilt, not the wedding one, a new one, bright and wild and not at all minimal. She spread it on my bed and smoothed it with her palms. I added extra red, she said, because you're young and you need it. I'm not that young, I said. You are, she said. Get over it. On a Saturday without plans, I took my dad to a flea market and bought a chipped ceramic bowl the color of the sky right before the sun disappears. We had hot dogs from a cart that smelled like every baseball game of my childhood. He clapped me on the back without saying anything, and his hand stayed there a second longer than usual. It was the kind of thank you that fathers give when their sons put a stake in the ground and say, here, this is where I stand. Months later, at a local street fair, I saw a chalkboard sign propped outside the kind of place that sells old records and plants, and someone had written in big friendly letters, "Love is not a sponsorship." It made me laugh. It made me feel seen. I took a picture and sent it to my mom. She sent back with a heart because moms are allowed to use hearts unwisely and still land them. People like to ask if I regret cutting off the money, the mood boards, the chandeliers I'd never hang again. There are mornings when I wake up and stretch in the quiet of my own house and feel an uncomplicated yes rise up in me. The day I said that sentence, "You're not on the guest list," she said. I cut the check. No money for the wedding. People heard the revenge in it. But for me, it wasn't a drama, it was a door. It was the line between being tolerated and being loved. It was saying no to a version of my life where I was a prop in someone else's picture. When Nora and I took our coffee to the river one evening, the light doing that soft gold thing where even the factories looked tender, she asked me what my favorite thing to make was. I told her about a kind of shelf that doesn't show its screws, how it looks like it floats. She grinned. Invisible strength, she said. That's my favorite kind. We didn't talk about weddings. We talked about dogs and splinters and the weird way some days smell like crayons for no reason. She told me about a time she almost quit photography and how a stranger's smile on a street kept her from putting her camera in a drawer forever. I told her about Madison's vines and Valerie-type friends and the way the words sponsor and partner taste so different in your mouth when you speak them out loud. When I walked her to her car, she paused with her hand on the door. "I'm glad you were brave," she said. "I get hired to make things look significant. But for what it's worth, the most beautiful thing I've photographed is always the moment someone tells the truth. I'm not a lesson or a cautionary tale. I'm a man who learned that love is not a stage, and I am not responsible for other people's applause. If vengeance was part of it, it was more like gravity than fireworks." Things fell back into place. The money I didn't spend found its way to lumber and tools and dinners with my parents and a plane ticket for my grandmother to see the ocean she'd always wanted to stand beside. On the boardwalk, she cried and wiped her eyes with a napkin, and I pretended not to notice so she could be proud. She took my hand. "This," she said, "this is a good use of a yes." And Madison? She sent a card at the New Year, a real paper card with a painting of a fox. She wrote that she'd told a therapist about wanting to be seen, and how the camera sometimes made that worse. She wrote that she was dating someone who didn't have any social media, who asked more questions than he answered, and how sometimes she wanted to grab her phone and didn't. She wrote, "Thank you for the way you left. I forgive you for the hurt I felt then. I hope you forgive me." I sat at my table and touched the words with the pad of my thumb. I said out loud to the air and the light, "I forgive you." It felt like setting down a box I'd carried too far. There are nights when I think about the table with the rosemary and the lemon, the planner and her whisper voice, the little cups of panna cotta, and the way a napkin can become a shield. I think about Madison's mouth forming the words, "You're not on the guest list," and how, for a second, everything in me wanted to make that okay, to smooth it over. And then I think about the click I felt in my chest, the exact right snap of a joint when it fits. How that sentence I said was not a threat, but a declaration of worth. A few weeks ago, Nora photographed a baby shower in a backyard where the grass was still damp from the morning. She sent me a picture of a grandmother passing a quilt to a new mom and wrote, "This made me think of you." I wrote back, "Quilts and honesty. Maybe that's all we need." She sent 3 little dots and then, "My vote is for coffee too." I smiled at my phone like an idiot. I've earned that kind of smile. The moral, if you need one, is simple enough to be useful. Don't hand over your self-respect for centerpieces. Don't confuse a brand with a bond. Don't be the sponsor for someone else's life when you've got one of your own to live. Forgive, yes. Forgive and keep the door open for your own better days to walk through. Ask for forgiveness when you're the one who loses the map. Let people change without letting them back in to rearrange your furniture. And if someone ever looks you dead in the eye and tells you you are not invited to the life you're paying for, take your wallet and your heart and go where you are. Then, when the hurt fades, when the quiet fills up with your own laughter and the sound your hands make when they work, when forgiving feels less like conceding and more like clearing the path, step into the simple grace of that new room. It's not the wedding photos I'm missing. It's the life that came after, and I'm not missing any of it. I'm here, in a house that smells like sawdust and coffee and rain on the porch, with a quilt on my bed that is loud on purpose. The door is unlocked. The lights are on. The guest list is everyone who knows the difference between being looked at and being seen. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about the story in the comments. See you in the next one.